And we will begin today with Lily Smallwood. I welcome you here. I will remind you that we have allotted 30 minutes for you to give your information. I do highly recommend that you allow us some time to question you. I think it's of value. I will warn you when you have reached the 20-minute mark, but really it is up to you how much time you take to present the information that you want to give us today. Thank you. Please give yourself an introduction for the record.
Madam Chair?
Yes.
Substitutions, Glenn Savoy for Jake Stewart.
Oh, we do have a substitution. Yes. It's the same members that we've had, so thank you very much. And there's another one coming. Kathy Rogers, I'm assuming, will also be substituting for Denis Larrey. All right. Thank you very much.
Good morning. I want to start by thanking you for the opportunity to speak with you today. I know you have been hearing from many doctors and experts on this issue over the past couple days, but I come to you today as simply a New Brunswick mother, a community volunteer, and a passionate fighter for the safety of my children. I won't offer you endless studies, theories, or statistics. I simply want to share with you our journey, the struggles we now face as a family, and the difficult decisions being thrust upon us to protect our children. I will tell you truthfully what it is like to be the mother and real-world protector of medically vulnerable children. You see, I wasn't always a fighter for my kids. I didn't have to be. When my first child was born, we experienced the same level of love and awe that I'm sure many of you have felt when holding your child for the first time. I remember the weigh-ins and checkups, and of course I remember the vaccinations that were just part of the routine. Having in-laws who are doctors and a father who is a pharmacist is quite handy for a first-time mother. We didn't need all the baby books when we had a family physician on speed dial. And when it came time for vaccinations, there wasn't much research necessary. We wanted to protect our baby as well as the community around us. We wanted to do our part as good parents and good citizens. So our first child received his shots, and even from the beginning there were reactions, though nothing drastic at first. He just got sick shortly after, and it was just a coincidence. That's what we were told, and we believed it. After his third round of shots, he got really sick and ended up in hospital. Again, we were told that it was just a coincidence. Even so, I didn't give him another shot for a year. He continued to struggle with his weight gain and growth, and even today, at 13, he still hasn't managed to get back on the growth chart. With our next child, I admit I was a little more hesitant. He followed a slightly delayed schedule, had some minor reactions, just coincidences, but he did have all his shots before starting kindergarten. For my third child, I felt differently. I couldn't fully say why, but on the morning of the appointment for his vaccinations, I felt a serious sense of dread. I remember my husband talking me into it in the parking lot, saying it would be okay. Our sweet baby Tally was about a year old, and he was really just a beautiful child. I didn't want to face even the slightest chance that something would happen to him. But I also wanted to do the right thing, the thing we're supposed to do. So in I walked to the public health office. That appointment changed our lives. Within the next couple weeks, our son's skin became covered in eczema and steadily became worse. And I'm not talking about your typical eczema here. I'm talking about a child who from then on lived in only white cotton washed in the mildest detergent, was given prescription creams for this medical condition, started a restricted diet, and yet still he was covered head to toe in bleeding, extremely itchy spots. I remember once standing in my driveway one day, crying in public as blood seeped through the back of his white pants. Tally cried, I cried, but it was just a coincidence. And still we went for our next appointment. He had his next shot 8 months later, and within the next couple weeks, his ankle swelled, and he cried in pain. We thought it might be an allergic reaction, but the Benadryl did nothing to ease the swelling. The anti-inflammatories eventually helped, and after a time, the swelling subsided, and it was brushed off by doctors as just another coincidence. At this point, the coincidences were piling up, and I decided to once again take a break from shots, though by now it was too late for my son. His downward spiral was well underway. I can't fully explain to you what it is like as a mother, watching your beautiful child experience challenge after challenge. By the age of 3, he felt like a medical mystery to me, strangely reactive to everything. It seemed to culminate in episodes of sudden onset fevers that led to seizures. Tally would suddenly say he felt unwell and then lie down, and we'd find him seizing. Nothing is scarier than seeing your child seize, vomit, and then start aspirating his vomit with clenched jaws. I can't tell you how hard I tried to pry his mouth open, trying to hook out the vomit that was going into his lungs. I can't tell you how hard I prayed. I can't tell you exactly how it felt to sit there helpless as the firemen and paramedics arrived to suction him and transfer him to the ER via ambulance. And then, in the following weeks, to sit there in the pediatrician's office and be told he was a perfectly healthy boy, that the reactions were really just coincidences to something in his environment. Within a couple months, Tally stopped walking due to severe swelling in his joints. After spending an entire summer in and out of the emergency room, after rounds of tests and procedures done in search of an answer, it was the end of August that we finally got it, a diagnosis for Tally. He has juvenile arthritis, an autoimmune disease. After vaccination, his immune system was triggered, and it just didn't turn off. And not just inflammation in his joints, but also previously undetected uveitis, which is autoimmune inflammation in his eyes. The uveitis wasn't caught soon enough, and so he was already suffering from corneal scarring on one side. That fall was a flurry of trips to the IWK in Halifax every month for a barrage of treatment plans that all failed and brought us to where we are today, a child who takes weekly immunosuppressant medications. He is one of those vulnerable children that Bill 39 is aiming to protect. I've told you about my first child's reactions, as well as my third son's long journey, and I'd like to tell you now a little bit about child number 2, who seemed to tolerate his shots okay. Well, he became sick last year. He started passing blood. He became pale and eventually severely anemic. Once again, the path to a diagnosis took months of frustrating tests and treatments before finally being referred on to the IWK yet again, and eventually identifying what was wrong with him. Crohn's disease, another autoimmune disease. Yet this one led to my 10-year-old on a feeding tube from January to June of this year. Our home has become a flurry of charging pumps, mixing bags and formula, endless amounts of formula. Formula that he still relies on today to keep his immune system from overreacting again. Here we are, a house with 2 vulnerable, sick kids. You can imagine my conflicted nature when I first heard about the bill. All the reports about how we need to protect immunosuppressed children by vaccinating everyone else. This discussion is very much real and alive in my own home. You see, Tally has 2 younger siblings. I should specify, Tally has 2 younger, unvaccinated siblings. We are a house divided. You see, when the time came for my daughter's shots, I just couldn't do it. The coincidences were just too much. I couldn't roll the dice and see what might happen. I couldn't live with myself if she became sick as well. And with 2 sick siblings, the odds aren't in her favor. But even so, she does not qualify for a medical exemption. The doctors say to just try it and see what happens. So where does that leave me? A mother struggling to do what is right for all her children. I want to protect Tally, but I have to ask, whose rights win here? The hard truth of having medically vulnerable children is that I can't fully protect them, and I can't expect others to assume personal risks of medical procedures in order to protect my family. That would be unethical. The fact is that even if every child in New Brunswick was voluntarily fully vaccinated, my son would still be at risk, just like every other immunocompromised child. What I've learned the hard way is that it's not the overt illnesses that put Tally at the greatest risk. It's the Tylenol-covered viruses, the sneaky little ones that are masked and sent to school, that in the average child are harmless, but in my child can quickly become life-threatening. We had to increase Tally's immunosuppressants, and he got sick, really sick. A mild cold turned into a retropharyngeal abscess, swelling behind his throat so that it made it nearly impossible to breathe, and for which he was hospitalized for a week in seclusion. That cold was one he picked up on his last day of kindergarten. Presenting Bill 39 as the way to create a safe school environment for vulnerable children is wishful thinking. As we've experienced in the recent outbreaks, the major illnesses get caught and treated heavily, but the just as dangerous everyday illnesses walk through the door all year long. I know the outbreaks were scary. We were directly exposed to pertussis in our children's schools. I know the fear that other moms of sick kids felt. We felt it too, and I in no way want to diminish those feelings and the stress involved. The problem is that they are always there, with every phone call from the school about exposure to one thing or another. But in the outbreaks this spring, something did become clear. The current policy regarding vaccination has proved itself to be effective and sufficient. When the outbreaks were declared, schools were notified. Those who could and wanted to be vaccinated were. Those who couldn't or chose not to stayed at home for a time. The outbreaks were contained. The current policy worked. Vaccination comes with undeniable risks. All medical procedures and treatments do. That's just the reality. But no matter how small the percentages are, even 1 in a million, when it happens, it's devastating. And if the government were to be the one who brought about that devastation, it would be unconscionable as lawmakers. You may hear doctors and experts fight and squabble, weighing the benefits versus the risks. But I'm asking you to let parents make the decision with their doctors and not with coercion from the proposed legislation. Making medical decisions for my children is what I do regularly. Which drugs to try, which plan to attempt to control the Crohn's, for example, I have to make that call. The doctors give me options, but I have to decide what is best for my children. It's a terrible burden, but it's one I must bear as their mother. No one could care more about their well-being than I do. God gave me these children. Why now should the Department of Education get involved with my family's private health care decisions? I assure you, the choice is hard enough to make as it is, and yet they are adding to my burden, pressuring families like mine to make decisions based on financial and educational factors, and not on what may be best for their family's health. The role of the government is the provision of education and health care, and that's why I believe this bill crosses the line. My children deserve the best education this province has to offer. Expecting me to attempt to give them some sort of education on my own is unfair to my family as taxpayers, but it also cuts my kids short. They deserve the opportunity to participate in the extracurriculars our wonderful school provides. They deserve the richness of a complete education, one I don't feel qualified to provide. And our local school deserves to have them in the classroom, and myself as a dedicated volunteer. We are on the sports teams, the drama crews, running fundraisers, and helping in the library. I myself personally run the garden club at our elementary school. My husband, who is an educator and has spent the past 6 years working on literacy curriculum, and myself, I've worked in the school system. We care deeply about the education and well-being of not only our own children, but of every child in this province. Exclusion is not the answer. This province has stood up for inclusion in the past. I hope today would be no different. We've been through a lot as a family. We've had to learn a lot along the way. We've looked serious illness in the eye. And my children have faced it so bravely. Every poke, test, hospitalization, constant medications, the loss of the chance to be normal. My 10-year-old even conquered placing his own feeding tubes by the end of it. I could not be prouder of how strong they are each and every day. My son resisting regular food for yet another glass of formula. He has had incentive, though. His biggest goal has been to get his health back so that he can try to make the soccer team in middle school. My kids really love their schools. They have lost some of their childhoods. The futures we once wrote for them have to be altered. We work on short-term goals now. It's an immense loss to give up on life as you know it can be and as it should be, but that's the life we have now after doing our part to protect the community around us. We did our part. I'm asking you now to please do your part to not exclude my children from their childhoods. Don't take their schools away. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. Questions?
I'd like to thank you very much for sharing your story. Very heartfelt, and if I heard correctly, you were trying to make the strong point that your immunocompromised children would be further immunocompromised when someone comes to school with a cold or other illnesses that are not vaccinated for. Am I right?
No, what I said was, it's the common cold that vaccinated children or anyone carry that can take out a child who's immunocompromised or someone on cancer treatment. It's the thing that we just sneeze, yeah. I mean, and to be honest, our schools were affected in the recent pertussis Fredericton outbreak, and I happen to know the family personally who had the pertussis, and an issue presented itself in that they were all fully vaccinated. One child had just had his booster in the fall. The issue being that they had immunity to protect themselves, but not enough immunity to protect them from getting it and carrying it to school. Because they were vaccinated, it actually allowed them to have such a mild cough that they all went to school for weeks before it was caught on. So we had been directly exposed repeatedly because their cough was really mild and they didn't think it was something as serious as whooping cough. Whereas those who have something as serious as whooping cough and don't have any immunity to it, when you get it, it's full-blown and you stay home.
Yeah, thank you. I was saying the same thing. I just didn't relate it correctly, I guess. So, in other words, the wide scope, say we had 100% vaccination for the illnesses that we vaccinate for today, it would not have prevented the immunocompromised children from still being impacted, you know, this group of vulnerable children who attend our public schools.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, I really don't have any other questions other than, again, just to say again, thank you for your courage in coming out to be a person to testify with your personal family story and bringing your family with you today. Thank you.
Thank you. I would like to add, because I have been on Twitter, I don't know why, but I went on Twitter, and I saw repeated references to people being stooges or shills or people being brought here by an organization, and the only person who brought me here this morning was my husband in our minivan. We live down the road, and we're here on our own this morning. We're here to speak for our family because this is who we are. This is what we're facing. I am not anti-vaccine, as evidenced by my children's immunization records, and by the fact that my in-laws are doctors, and I'm raised in a household that believes in science, and that's why we've made the decisions we've made. And I welcome any questions because I'd love to have this conversation over a cup of tea and not necessarily in this scary venue.
Mr. Northrup.
Thank you, Ms. Smallwood, for being here. We can get you a cup of tea if you'd like. we do have it here. And I applaud your courage for being here and bringing your young family with you. And I can't imagine the mornings and afternoons and evenings having 4 children going all over the place with them. And I know we talked a little earlier, and you spent some time at the Circle Square Ranch, and I'm sure your kids enjoyed it there very much. So I'm very intrigued about one of the statements that you made here. And I think it kind of sums it all up, what we've heard the last couple of days. And I'm asking you to let parents make the decisions with their doctors and not with the coercion from the proposed legislation. And making medical decisions for my children is what I do regularly. And I think that kind of explains everything that has happened here in the last couple of days. And I think you've explained it very well in this letter, but I was very intrigued by that statement, and I'm just wondering if you could elaborate on that a little bit more, sort of thing, as far as if you were sitting in our seat and we were sitting where you were sitting, what would you recommend?
Well, what I have seen and what I've read is that there are those trying to make this a debate about vaccine efficacy and safety, and that's not what the issue is before you. This is not about whether vaccines are safe. We know they work, but we also know that there are undeniable risks. The issue before you today is whether the government of New Brunswick can deny public services to taxpayers based on their private health care decisions. Can the government of New Brunswick discriminate against children who have not received a vaccination? That's the issue you're facing. I'm not talking about whether they work, which is what everyone seems to be talking about, and I know they did fly some people in to talk about how horrible vaccinations are, and that is not what I'm going to sit here and say to you, because I don't believe it. But I will sit here and say that as a mother, as a parent, no one cares more about their safety than I do. And for the Minister of Education to tell me that not having children allows him to be more calloused and unbiased and make decisions about the safety of my children, extremely hurtful, extremely hurtful. We don't parent with callousness. We parent with the care that children require. And of course I'm going to do what's best and in their best interest and for their safety. But also I care about the community around me. And I proved that by vaccinating my children in the first case. That's what I did. But there comes a point where for my personal family, and I only speak for myself, we could not offer up our children anymore as a sacrifice for herd immunity. We couldn't do it. I couldn't even offer up my daughter to save my son's life. So how can we ask other parents who really feel strongly that it's not the best interest? And I don't believe that there are hordes of people out there who are making this decision just based off the internet or based off of, as Dominic Carty said, Russian bots. I don't believe it. I believe that there are families in New Brunswick who are making this decision because of their private family medical history. You know, and he had talked to me about getting a medical exemption for my kids, which I don't know how a Minister of Education can have that kind of power over doctors, but I'm intrigued to find out. But even if my kids got a medical exemption, I would still sit before you today and I would make this case for the other children who don't have the case that we have, for my nieces and nephews who are genetically tied to my kids. If it's just bad genes, hey, they might have them too. I'd make the case for other families who have, you know, family issues down the line. It's the fact that we don't know, and we can't sit in the shoes of somebody else or sit in the seat of judgment over a mother's decision when they are honestly trying to do the best for their child. And we're not talking about something that's life-saving. We're not talking about children who are about to die and you're interceding as the government to save their lives. You're talking about prophylactic treatment that is not indicated. I remember at one point when swine flu was on the go, my older child got swine flu. And the doctor gave us a prescription for Tamiflu for the other children, just in case. It was my decision whether or not to take the Tamiflu. Now, could the government step in and say I was wrong to not give a prophylactic treatment for Tamiflu? It was my call to make. The doctor acknowledged it was my call to make. He put that in my hands. If my kids had then gotten sick, would you come and prosecute me because I didn't give them the Tamiflu? You don't know what's going to happen. You can't prosecute someone on hindsight. It's completely unfair. Parents are trying to do the best they can for their kids. And to infer otherwise is, I don't know, misogynistic at best, to tell a mother she is tainted by her emotions towards her children. I can't even with that. It has to be left in the hands of the parents who are actively trying to do their best. And to say I'm making this up off the internet, I spend way too much time in hospitals to make this up off the internet. We're literally leaving here and going to the hospital for an appointment at 11:30. That's my life. I'm not on the internet looking up spook theories from Russian bots. And to imply that I'm some sort of sellout is insulting and demeaning, and so I will stand here and I will boldly say that that's not what I am.
Thank you for being here, and thank you very much for sharing your story. That's all I have, Madam Chair.
Go ahead, Ms. Minton.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for your time this morning. I appreciated what you said that this bill and this shouldn't be a debate about the efficacy of vaccinations. I would agree. I support immunizations. I think the most important thing is getting New Brunswick kids vaccinated. But as you acknowledged, not every single child can. There's a reason there's medical exemptions. And I guess I would just like, could you just elaborate a bit more on the impact of Bill 39 that would have on your family? Thank you.
My family directly, I'm pretty sure that out of my 5 children, all 5 would be excluded, because my younger 2 who are unvaccinated cannot get a medical exemption. But the real kicker is that my 2 children who are sick, even the immunosuppressed child, cannot get a full medical exemption. So if my sick children can't get a medical exemption, who can? That's what I don't know. I don't understand. If my child, and I do, because I've had this discussion ongoing with the specialists of the IWK. This is an ongoing conversation in my life regularly. They've wanted to have boosters for the kids. They contacted me during the measles outbreak in St. John, and they wanted to give measles boosters to my 10-year-old who had just stopped bleeding after a year of bleeding, okay? I know what the vaccine would do to someone with an autoimmune condition. I know because I've already experienced it with my other son. Once we got him walking again and doing okay, we couldn't get the eyes to settle down, so we had to go on serious immunosuppressants. Before we did that, they wanted to increase his vaccinations, and I agreed. So we gave him more vaccinations, put him back in a wheelchair. We had just got him walking, and the vaccination put him back in a wheelchair. We got through that flare. They wanted to give another shot. I allowed it. I'm a very compliant mother, it seems. We did it. He lost the whole use of one of his arms. For the first 72 hours, they brushed it off as a normal reaction to vaccination. But when it progressed for over a week and 10 days, they started to acknowledge, okay, yeah, this is an adverse reaction. They didn't really take note. They didn't do anything with that information, but at least they acknowledged that that's what it was. So I know what happens when you give a vaccination to someone who has an autoimmune disease. So my child who is currently in a controlled remission state, am I going to go give him a measles booster? Am I going to give him his shots in grade 7? No. I will not put his direct health at risk, because that's what I'm told to do. I won't do it. I can't go back to the feeding tubes. I don't know how to explain. You talk about how busy our mornings were. When you have to get up and at 6 a.m. and make fresh formula and hook it up through a tube in your child's nose, that's a busy morning. I can do 5 kids in the morning. I can't go back to the feeding tubes. And if I have to give him his shots in grade 7, his boosters, that's what's going to happen. And so, no, even my 6 kids will be excluded from school. And I can't even wrap my mind around that there's not even a space, because, and to be fair, the Department of Education, they can't dictate to doctors what to give medical exemptions for. That's overreaching. I've been promised that, oh yes, we'll give guidelines. But you can't. You can't give guidelines to a medical board on what they're going to sign as a medical exemption, because some are just not going to do it. It's in their own conscience. They're private practitioners. So it's just that's what's going to happen. All 5 of my kids will be removed from their schools. And I don't even want to imagine what that would do for our family. I mean, I couldn't stay in a province where the burden of education is falling solely on my head. We have to get jobs and work. We have to take care of these kids. And to be honest, taking care of 2 sick kids is kind of a full-time job. I can't slip in an English lesson.
So that is exactly the question that I would have had for you. And because we're running low on time, I'm going to be selfish and get my question out there. What effect will this have on your family if your 5 children are unable to attend school? I've heard you say that they love school, and I appreciate that, because my children love school as well. What other effect will this have on your family?
I don't know how we'd be able to stay in New Brunswick. I really don't. I don't know how we'd be able to stay here, which is heartbreaking, because we chose New Brunswick. This is where we want to be. We bought a home here. We've been here for I don't know how many years, way too, like all the years we've been here. I've spent more time here than in my birth province. This is where we want to be, and I don't know how we'd be able to stay in a province that segregates my children and others them and excludes them from a normal childhood experience and a proper education. And I'm not saying that homeschooling is not a proper education. It can be for those who choose it, but to force it upon those who are not equipped or don't feel capable of giving that to my kids is completely unfair of this government. And I don't know how it could even be allowed. I don't know how this would not escalate into some kind of human rights case.
Do you feel you have the capacity to homeschool your children?
I could give them education. My children are bright, they're avid learners, but could I give them the full richness of the current situation that they have in their education? Absolutely not. You can't you can't quantify how deep a public school education can be. We thoroughly love our school. When I say we love it, I mean, I know lots of kids love it. We are so involved, it's almost ridiculous. Like I said, I run the garden program at our school, and I do, and I'm a library volunteer. I'm on the PSSC, the home and school, and my kids are on every drama, production, sport team, any group you can have. They're a part of it because they love that richness and fullness and the partaking of community, which is what we have. Our school is our community. And if we lost that, it would be very detrimental to their well-being. I mean, as I've said, my kids have issues. And when my son was going through his feeding tube, he wouldn't leave the house. He wouldn't go to Costco. He wouldn't go to the mall. There was only one place he would go in public with that feeding tube, and that was school, because school was his safe place.
Thank you.
And that should send a pretty powerful message. That's the kind of community that we have.
Mr. DeSonia, do you have any questions?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mrs. Smallwood, I want to thank you very much for appearing here today, and I thank you for bringing your family as well. I want to tell you that your presentation has amplified in my mind some of the issues I've been hearing this week. There's a commonality, there's a common thread appearing in the testimony and the presentations that I've heard. And I thank you very much for amplifying that in my mind, because it's going to help me. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for listening. I mean, I know sometimes I was emotional or impassioned, but I'm a mama bear because I have literally had to fight for my kids for years. And that was not easy, but it has made me the woman I am right now, so I'm thankful for the struggle, I guess.
Thank you very much for your time. Thank you for your courage. Your presentation was absolutely appreciated, and your notes will certainly be reviewed. Thank you.